There are many terms used when describing an individual's background, many of which bleed into one another and may have quite ambiguous uses in our everyday lives. As to just why it's so important for people to discover their own background and express interest in others around the globe is up to your own interpretation, but I find that most people in the English-speaking world tend to use these terms incorrectly, which isn't really their fault since the media and most public curriculum tend to use a lot of these interchangeably, and hey, I even find myself guilty of this as well out of habit or in attempting to explain a concept that not many are familiar with. Race, ethnicity, nationality, ancestry, heritage, lineage, genealogy, and phenotype actually refer to very different concepts of classification of the human species, despite all sounding like they should pretty much be talking about the same thing. But in today's video, we're going to be going over these different terms and how they differ and how they manifest themselves in the real world. Essentially, to help sum it up, and because this is probably the simplest term to define, ancestry is the family origin or background of an individual and may not necessarily also be in reference to one's ethnic or national origin, and this could also be used to denote common descent from a particular ancestor. For instance, it's pretty well known in the United States that the Mayflower brought some of the first British settlers to America, and although they started as quite a small group of religious dissidents, it's actually estimated that 10 to 30 million American citizens, up to 10% of the country, has at least some degree of ancestry from the original Pilgrims. Heritage is defined as the traditions and customs passed on throughout the generations of a particular culture, possibly being the most fluid of classifications as culture can shift in an extreme manner in only a generation or so, or sometimes it seems even more frequently than that. So even though Germans are officially the largest ancestry group in the United States of America, only a small percentage have any connection with their German heritage whatsoever, as in the past couple hundred years, virtually the entire community has been assimilated into mainstream American culture, losing their language and customs, clearly catalyzed by the tensions during and after the two world wars. But this brings us to ethnicity. What exactly is an ethnic group? An ethnic group is generally a pretty solid grouping of individuals based on a common national or cultural background, generally sharing a common language and nominal religious practices, and obvious simple examples of this would be the Germans, Swedes, Romanians, Bulgarians, Greeks, or others, and in Europe, this generally correlates pretty heavily with modern international borders for a variety of factors, namely rapid ethnic assimilation and repatriation in the past century. Nationality merely refers to belonging to a nation, i.e. the citizenship of an individual, with the previously mentioned European ethnic groups also belonging to fairly homogeneous countries from a national standpoint. Nationality doesn't always align perfectly with ethnicity, however, as for instance citizens of the Southeast Asian country of Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, are referred to as Burmese regardless of ethnicity. However, the largest ethnic group in the country, consisting of around 60% of the population, are known as the Bamar, while other ethnic groups in the country are more closely related to the Thai or Cambodians. The process in which different ethnic groups form, known as ethnogenesis, can be quite simple or complicated, as in the case of the English, who formed through centuries of migration from mainland European Germanic tribes to the British Isles, conquering and eventually integrating with the native Celtic tribes. So the English language is predominantly Germanic in origin, yet the English people share a large degree of ancestry with the Celtic nations. In today's day and age, due to migration, this can become terribly confusing, as someone could be of ethnic Polish ancestry, yet have German nationality, or a Turkish national may have some Albanian or Circassian ancestry, yet consider themselves ethnically Turkish due to their family's cultural assimilation into the country. Now, the biggest term, and probably the most misused, race, actually does have a couple of definitions in this context, as historically it was used more or less simply to refer to an extended tribe of people who shared the same background, language, culture, and history. But around the 17th century, European anthropologists started to use this term to divide the human species into various categories with distinct and observable physical characteristics. Obviously, humans had been doing this long beforehand, in fact since ancient times. but this was the first time an ambitious effort was made to group the people of the world together in various ways regarding their more primordial ancestry. But it's really interesting to see that even before the advent of genetic testing technology, the anthropologists of old largely got it right in terms of different larger classifications, such as knowing that Europeans, North Africans, Middle Easterners, Northern Indians, even Horn Africans share a large degree of ancient ancestry despite their differences, a grouping archaically referred to as the Caucasian race, yet has come to be known as the more accurate term of Western Eurasian in modern academic circles of DNA research. The anthropologists and historians of the past were able to piece together the design of modern relations between larger human groups through the study of migration patterns, language, oral traditions, recorded history, archaeological discoveries, and phenotype, and this can be broken down by further and further arbitrary divisions as more information is uncovered. Here's one that most people don't know about, and contrary to popular belief, the term phenotype does not strictly refer to physical appearance, but rather the expression of all genes. So skin color, facial features, hair color and texture, height, build, bone structure and density, skull shape, and other exterior manifestation of different genes may be the most obvious indicators of one's shared heritage, but there are other less skin-deep ways in which phenotypes may distinguish themselves. For instance, not many people know that various drugs will actually affect different population groupings in unique ways, which may or may not correlate along ethnic or racial lines, or even more specific markers of genetic semblance, and this is also true for prescription medication, recreational drugs, and alcohol, as anyone could tell you that East Asians and Native Americans obviously react differently, with these groups on average having a much lower tolerance for alcohol than those of European descent, which the European settlers actually used to their advantage when colonizing the Americas. Different races, and even down to different ethnic groups, may display distinct, often remarkable phenotypes that are highly regionalized or specific to that one group, or may have a large degree of overlap with others, and phenotype is mostly a result of natural selection, with competing individuals shaping the generations with the best adaptations to their particular environment, although sometimes different phenotypes can arise in the most unexpected of places due to fluke migrations, such as the populating of Madagascar by Austronesian tribes from Southeast Asia, or the migration of ancient Western Eurasians to the Horn of Africa, greatly influencing the facial features we see in Ethiopians and Somalis today, clearly being quite distinguishable from other sub-Saharan Africans. Some migrations of people may not have left a lasting impact at all, and their influence has been washed away over the millennia, but others may have left their legacy in terms of language, culture, or religious beliefs that they left behind. But perhaps one of the most interesting is the concept of a lineage. A lineage is a line of descent from a particular ancestor, which in the majority of societies around the world is generally traced from a father to his children, meaning the sons will inherit the identity and legacy of their father, who inherited from their grandfather, and so on, although in some cultures it is traced from the mother to her children, while in others still, such as in Spanish-descended societies, they use both of their parents' ancestry, which is why in Spain and other Hispanic countries people have such lofty names, drawing from both their mother and father's sides of the family. These lineages can actually be traced back genetically with genetic markers known as haplogroups, immutable characteristics that are passed down patrilineally from father to son, but also matrilineally from a mother to all of her children, and I actually explain this in much greater detail in an older video. Not many people know this, but Western Europeans and those from northern Nigeria technically share the same paternal lineage, meaning if you go back far enough, the great-grandfather times 100 of a Hausa man and an Englishman would be the same person, as they share the same haplogroup R1b, as do Ethiopians and Greeks, Russians and Indians, Swedes, Serbs, and Sardinians, and sometimes it really does seem completely random and arbitrary the way different haplogroups or lineages have formed over thousands of years, but they're actually a fairly useful tool in deciphering human migration patterns and trends of intermixing and diffusion. But it's important to realize that when discussing haplogroups, these are mostly generalities, as even the most genetically homogeneous populations do not have a completely uniform haplogroup distribution, with a few exceptions, such as the extremely isolated natives of the Andaman Islands, who actually just so happen to share their haplogroup with Tibetans and the Japanese. So think of a haplogroup as a genetic surname that remains unaltered throughout the generations, showing a common line of descent, even if there is no close genetic relation. Now, keep in mind, a lot of countries don't take censuses on race or ethnicity, but they do take censuses on language, which outside of the Americas and the rest of the Western world is actually a pretty solid indicator of shared ethnic background, but sometimes official censuses will misuse these terms as well. In the former British colonies of Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei, the governments enumerate what they claim to be the three main races or ethnic groups, those being the Chinese, Indians, and Malays. However, anyone could tell you that India is definitely not an ethnically or racially homogeneous country, but over time the different South Asian communities that have migrated to the region have gradually fused into one community and have a common sense of heritage. While similarly, the Malay category actually includes anyone of Malaysian or Indonesian descent, including the Javanese, Sundanese, Achinese, or Bantonese, who have migrated to this area in the past couple centuries. I actually use the phrase ethno-racial to describe various people groups with a common sense of identity, which is a term that I don't actually think anyone else has used in the past before myself, at least not in the same manner. In different countries, people prioritize different aspects of their identity when forming different social structures. In India and other parts of South Asia, caste was previously hailed as the main identifier, although now it's more of a combination of regionalism and religious adherence. And similarly, in Southeast Asia and parts of Sub-Saharan Africa, religion is the most important. In Latin America, it's a socio-economic spectrum largely tied to the racial background of the individual, while I would argue that in most of the Anglophone countries, especially the United States, phenotype and culture have become the dominant factors for community identification, as most people almost always use the terms race and ethnicity incorrectly. So essentially, people of the same race are not all the same ethnicity. People of the same ethnicity are not the same nationality. People of the same nationality may not have the same ancestry. People of the same ancestry may not share the same heritage. People of a common heritage may not have the same lineage. And of course, people of the same lineage may not, in fact probably don't, have the same phenotype. I hope you were able to follow along and this cleared up any confusions for you in past and future videos. And for today's poll, let me know which aspect of one's background you find to be the most interesting. And as always, this has been Mason. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.